Check. There we go. You guys should be able to hear me now. And this, I think, is the other thing. Okay. Just checking some other things. Give me a second here. I gotta remember which one is gonna give you the music. If you're not watching this live and you want to skip over this nonsense, that is a thing that you can do. Let me check something here. Hopefully my voice isn't echoing. Let me know if it's echoing. But it shouldn't be. Anyways, I've been away for a week, and that's long enough for the system I use for streaming to change its settings. But we should have audio in all regards now. Okay. Anyways, let me focus back up here and say hello. What we do here is we read old folklore and fairy tales, and if you want to get right to those stories, if you've already had enough of this blabbity blab and you don't want any introduction to the concepts tonight or anything like that, you have the benefit, if you're not watching it live, of going down to the description below and clicking on, and I'm going to tell you what title you want to click on to get the first story of the night. It's pronounced differently between German and English, but in English, it's pronounced the Chamois Maiden of Kalmtal Valley. If you're German, it's Chamois, according to Google Translate, which I don't trust. But they are the creatures in the mountains that kind of look like goats. That will be our first narrative story of the night, so if you look down in the description below, you can jump ahead to that. Because I'm going to do some introduction. We're going to talk a bit about the Aurora and its folklore. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Maidens of the High Alps and why I'm talking about them tonight. And we are going to read a section of translation of an article from an old folklore book, but isn't itself, strictly speaking, folklore, which isn't narrative per se. So you may not want to do that. If not, go down in the description, click on the Chamois Maiden in the Kalmtal Valley. If you are here live, though, there is a live chat that I've been ignoring while I figured out my audio issues. And that live chat contains the lovely Tammy Morelli, who has been going through some troubles with her shoulder, but luckily she has an appointment to see a specialist, and apparently they have funnied her up on the funny pills. So she's having a good time. GS is here. Hello, GS. It's good to see you again. Jumpstore is here. Thank you very much for your kind comments, by the way, all of you, on the post that I made announcing the cancellation last week. I didn't respond to those individually because I simply didn't have the emotional purchase at that point to do it, but it was really lovely to read. Witchery is here, says hello, hoping things are going better now. I hope so too. Zombie Wolf is here, says hey guys. Hello Zombie Wolf, it's good to see you. Clara is here, says, can't hear you. Fair enough, Clara. Also, welcome, Clara. And you were gone too long. I'm here for the Folklore Academia. Okay, good. Says Witchery. Thank you, everybody, for, returning and being patient last week. I will say up front that there is a small possibility I may have to suddenly leave. I don't suspect that will happen, but if at some point, like a story or something gets cut short, that'll be why. And I'll come back and I'll finish this another time, but I don't think that's going to happen today. Exactly how many stories we get through, I don't know either. They're all a little bit longer than usual, so we'll see how many we get through. But that's enough blabbing and wasting time on technical stuff. Let's get to the introduction and what we're doing tonight. I saw the Aurora on the weekend. Now, I live in Canada. Not only Canada, but southern Canada. So it's pretty much never here. And I got to see the Aurora because it was in massive at that point. And it was stunning. You might think it was the colors that enamored me too, if you've only ever seen pictures of it. But actually, the colors are a bit muted. I learned that much of the vibrancy of Aurora pictures is not something the human eye detects well. No, what stood out was the enormity of it in combination with its undulations as if it were alive. And staring up at the nexus of it, which if you want to see pictures of that, it is on my Mastodon account, which you can find linked in my description below. And how its shifting light billowed out as a gown's hem rippled out towards the horizon, gave me the sense that it was under the protection of some sort of like beneficent goddess. It was a very cool experience. So naturally, I wanted to read you folklore on the miraculous splendor of the Aurora. Yet, you'll notice that I'm not doing that. And let me revisit my explanation why that I think I first articulated in our Icelandic volcano one. Folklore is not always narrative. At least in the sense that the stream depends on it being. Instead, folklore is often presented as a local factoid with no specific story attached to it. And those little factoids compose some of my favorite pieces of folklore, but they don't really make compelling listening on this stream. They're basically a sentence long. So to give you an example, a few examples actually, of what the folklore around Auroras mostly is, I'm going to read a paragraph from an excellent article by Simon Roy Hughes that he put on his blog a few years ago. Simon Roy Hughes is the one who does our translations of Asbjornsen and Moe, and we're doing Norwegian folklore. On the traditions of the Aurora. I will also, if I don't forget, link the full article below in the comments, but if I do forget, someone remind me. And I quote from it now. Speculation concerning the nature and significance of the Northern Lights has continued into the folklore of more modern times, too. In their article, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the Norwegian here, the translation is The Historical Northern Lights, that's the title. Brecka and Egeland give a list of Nordic traditions. In Sweden, the Aurora may have indicated a civil war fought by angels flinging flaming fragments of fat wood at one another. Fat wood is a resinous core wood from pine, I think, that is extremely flammable. So they're hucking flaming logs at each other. That's what's supposed to be happening there. The real friends were the fat wood we flung at each other along the way. Or perhaps the light comes from the Sami reindeer herders searching for their herds by torchlight. That's another theory. In Sweden and Denmark, the Northern Lights were thought to come from a fire-spitting mountain given by God to bring warmth and light to the cold darkness of winter. Often, folk feared a vengeful Aurora, which would maim or kill those who mocked it, and there was a widespread notion that old maids would in death be taken up to the Northern Lights, perhaps even providing fuel for its fire. The real fat wood was the maids we made along the way. Okay, carrying on. The Sami were afraid that the Aurora would come down to take or kill their children. On the Faroe Islands, children were warned to keep a hat on in the winter for fear the Northern Lights would scorch their hair off. The fear was possibly the reason the Swedes would not cut their hair beneath the light of the Aurora. The earthy Norwegians, however, understood the Northern Lights to be a sildeblixt, I think. The gleam from the huge shoals of herring projected onto the clouds. In other words, just a natural phenomenon. Okay, so you can see the problem. Like, those are all interesting, but they're not stories, right? And because I can't really find stories, per se, on the Aurora, I did also find another one that was interesting. I think it was Finnish. People see it as a flaming fox that's jumping across the sky. But again, not a story. Instead, I've chosen tales that remind me of the feeling I had when I was looking up at the nexus of the lights, which is to say that a great sky goddess was swaddling me safely in its beautiful gown. So these are the tales of the blessed maidens of the High Alps, which are pretty significant figures in folklore, German folklore in particular. Well, German, I guess. That's the closest equivalent we have today, I suppose, of how to describe where this region is. But To begin, we are going to read a summary article from the past that mixes in some stories of them, so there will be some stories, but it does sort of describe their presence in folklore. And then we're going to read a few stories about the Blessed Maidens. Zombie Wolf says, I love the Finnish myth of Auroras, as they refer to them as foxfires, and then says, hey, no stealing my words, Rory. Yes, I do know that myth. Anyways, the problem with that article is it's a bit too long and too academic for this show, so I'm only going to read part of it. But if you want to read the whole thing, you should go to Patreon and support Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which is where I'm pulling it from. And it's a translator, specifically Jürgen Hubert, who is going to have translated all the stories tonight. I will have him linked below and his Patreon. You should support it. Each month you get 3 or 4 new stories translated, many of which have never been translated out of German. They're all excellent. There's already like thousands of stories that you would get even just signing up for a month. And no, I don't get any kickbacks on it. I just really depend on that stuff being done. So please go support Jürgen. But anyways, we're going to read an article that Jürgen translated. If you don't care about the academic side and you're not watching it live, I'll tell you one more time. Go down to the description below and click on the timestamp next to the Chamois Maidens of Kalmtal Valley. That will take you to the first proper story we're covering tonight. Let me have a drink of water. Let me ask the usual question. What tea are you drinking if you're drinking tea? I'm still drinking my boring old Earl Grey. Jumpstore says many people in their family did get to see it, though it doesn't seem that they did. And Zombie Wolf didn't get to see them. That's a shame. I did have to drive a fair ways out of town onto like a highway and farms to be able to really see them. I could sort of see it. They looked in the city like thin clouds, and it just helped that I knew there was no clouds that night. Cheers. Okay. Sorry for the headphone users. Right. Our first story tonight isn't really a story so much as a summary academic article written about 100 and something years ago that has been translated recently by Jürgen Hubert of Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which is a Patreon you can support below that translates German folklore, and you should. It is called Hulda and the Blessed Maidens. This Hulda, as far as I can tell, has pretty much nothing to do with the Huldr or the Huldra of Finnish, Danish, and various Scandinavian folklore that we've discussed on many streams, so don't compare them. There doesn't seem to be a connection, or if there is, it's lost. Among the mythical beings appearing in the folk beliefs of the Tyrolene, there's a lot of words I'm going to struggle, unfortunately, with. Tyrolene land, the Zalaga, or Blessed Maidens are the most distinguished. The overall designation is altered in some valleys, where they appear as wild maidens, forest women, mountain women, white maidens, and even sometimes, though much more rarely, as snow maidens. The term Holy One is also encountered without implying a relationship to the saints of the church. Salge is only the direct dialect variation of the Upper Inn Valley, where the E in many words is spoken as an A, such as Gald or Fald, and so forth. The queen of the Blessed Maidens is Hulda, who is already the most significant female figure of German myths, and the footnote here is Jürgen telling you that apparently that is true, but we haven't really encountered it much in our streams. Take him at his word. Almost all of her traits, which are encountered in the Thuringian and Swabian legends are repeated in Tyrol as well. But the mythology of her entourage is richer in Tyrol and purer and in more ideal state as well. The poetry of the inner life of the people acted more creatively here, and sang a song of the Golden Age, a time of innocence, of the purity of souls, and the customs to the land. You should know that this writer has a bias, let's say. It'll come through as we work through it. Keep in mind, it's a fairly old article, but it does give us a good summary of these blessed maidens of the Alps. Herders listened to the song and sung it faithfully anew. Like in the rest of Germany, Hulda is the patron of flax cultivation similar to Cirrus of antiquity. Flax, we know it as a seed that you sometimes use instead of eggs, but flax, the plant itself, could be woven into cloth and often was. So that's the reference here. As the poets say, the guardian of benevolent moors, which bring humans together. The flax from the Ötztal Valley is still considered to be the best in the country, according to legend. Hulda first introduced flax cultivation there. I like how Tolkien that is. That's a very Tolkien thing. A goddess coming down and teaching you how to plant things and grow very special stuff. Its most delicate threads are sold far into foreign lands and at higher prices than any other flax. During the time when the flax blossoms bloomed, Hulda journeyed over the fields of flax with a joyous countenance, righted bent stalks, and blessed plants and blossoms. Her abode was a crystal palace, where, accompanied by lovely singing, she spun those balls of twine whose thread never ran out, and which she used to reward and bring joy to devout and diligent, poor but virtuous housewives and girls. Oh, Genera's here. Hello, Genera. In the imagination of the Tyrolean country population, Hulda's realm beneath the mountains has been detailed in a highly poetic manner, and this is quite lovely of a description coming here. Chamber upon chamber with vaults of glittering mountain crystal have been adorned with garnets. The ceilings are of transparent, glittering glacial ice in which the sunlight illuminating the grotto is magically fractured into thousands of colors of the rainbow. Surrounding the goddess's palace is an almost inaccessibly paradisiacal landscape, and with gardens full of miraculous flowers, eternally green hills, and groves populated by chamois and shimmering snow growths, wild streams with golden-scaled trouts above it all, the pleasant whispering breeze of an eternal spring. And I do want to read this. This is a note. I don't normally read the translator's notes, but there's a few that matter here. The German word used here, Wunderblume, or marvelous flower, is also used elsewhere in German folklore for strange flowers that only bloom on certain nights. And I won't go any deeper than that. The Blessed Maiden, Hulda's subjects, and in a manner her servants, dwelled with her in this wide, splendid realm. From it, assorted secret and hidden portals led into the regions of the human world, which regional legends still know and designate today. It was not uncommon for those openings to terminate closer to a glacier, but they were often hours away in a dark, wild forest region or between naked rock crevices which hide a block of stone or an icy wall from the human gaze. Only rarely was a mortal honored with the privilege to enter the realm of the blessed ones, and woe to them if they accidentally mentioned this favor of the good spirits to anyone else. We will see a story about that. Some were also lured into the magical interior of the mountain by sweet, heart-stirring songs and never returned to the outside world. This element hints of the Middle German Venus and Tannhäuser tales, which I don't think we've read here, but I won't go into now. The legends portray the Blessed Maidens as dressed with silver-threaded cloth, girded with golden bracers, beautiful as the angels in form. Well, the medieval conceptions of angels, not biblical angels, as we all know, with blonde curls and blue eyes. This blue of the eyes was the color of the flax blossom or of the mountain speedwell, which, like the lady's mantle, was a flower holy to Hulda. In appearance, the Queen of the Blessed Ones was just like the latter, only more beautiful and regal, and her head was adorned with a tiara made out of garnets. On festival days, Hulda wore a dress of color that was as rosy as the dawn, and the Blessed Maidens adorned their heads with snow roses. The activities of Queen Hulda and her Blessed Maidens were manifold in the manner of blessing, weal-bringing deities as they are encountered in the midst of most countries. They carried succor and blessings into the huts of humans, brought curative mount herbs to the ill, and taught the whole flax trade to girls, from the planting of flax seeds to the sewing of bridal shirts. They also helped with the spinning of the flax itself and brought fortune to the houses in which they dwelled. They adorned the graves of children who had died early with flowers. This, too, is an important trait of the Hulda myth, for, according to Falkland legend, the souls of of all unbaptized children belong to her, which is quite interesting, by the way, because the Fae usually don't have this connection to holiness. Okay. Don't know why that went away. Let's get you back up. For all the good things they did to the mothers and sisters of a house, the Blessed Ones never took wages nor gifts. To the contrary, when someone insulted them with such proposals, they departed with a sad countenance and never returned, a trait which can be primarily found in the legends of the little people, which of course are the Fae and so on. I think that's where I wanted to call it. Yeah. I think the rest we get through stories. So that's as much as I'll say on them, but that gives you an insight that they aren't traditional Fae spirits. They are seen as connected to the Christian God, which is quite unusual. They do have weird little rules and stuff, and sometimes what they do is less than savory, as we'll see. But That is a little introduction for you folks as to what we're dealing with. Janera, it is good to see you. I hope things are going well for you. We're talking about snow in Australia. Anything else? No. Okay. Well, let's get to a story about these maidens. These stories are a little more involved than our usual fare, I believe. From Germany anyways. Usually we deal with shorter stories, but we'll see how many we get through. I have, I think, up to 4 that I could read, 5 maybe, but I don't think we're going to get through all 5. Our first proper narrative story tonight is the Chamois Maiden in the Kalmtal Valley. And it concerns their, I think, perfect favored trait of mine. They are defenders of the chamois, which are a sort of a mountain goat, sort of a mountain antelope. You can look them up. You'll see what I mean. And they are what is a referenced in my current title for this stream. Between Zaltus and St. Martin, the Kulm, or the Kulbin Valley, flows in to the Passa River. Its streams form a beautiful waterfall at its exit. Deep in the narrows of the valley, where sky-yearning rocks rise up to the clouds from the greens of the alpine meadows, a poacher once shot a chamois mother. She had harmlessly played with her young calf, which she had recently given birth to, on a small stretch of grass. The poor animal fell down dead at the huntsman's feet, and the young was so frightened by the shot that it likewise rolled down the rock cliff, broke a leg, and was lying helpless in a spot where the pardon me, where the marksman could not see it. Then a blessed maiden stepped out of a shrub-covered crevice and made her appearance. She flowed over the meadow like sunlight. The maiden's gown was as white as snow, and the girdle that was wrapped around her ethereal body was golden. The Blessed One stepped down into the thicket in which the suffering calf was lying. She lifted it up, carried it to a spring, and washed it clean. She plucked bittercress and squeezed its sap into the animal's wound. Then she set a splint around the broken limb and made out of wide lichens and roots. Without her realizing it, this deed was observed by a herder. He witnessed how the Blessed One pressed the animal against herself and searched around for further help, letting the gaze of her blue angel's eyes radiate over the area. Then the Blessed Maiden noticed the herder. She hurried towards him, trustingly gave him her ward, and said to him, "Give my poor darling goat's milk to drink for 3 full months, and then I shall come to you and fetch it. If you take proper care of this little animal, then you shall never regret it." And with these words, the Blessed One floated away. And the herder, well, he was still overwhelmed by this encounter. He looked at the spot where she had stood and vanished as if he was dreaming. Nevertheless, he dutifully and conscientiously took care of the little chamois calf. Soon it joyfully jumped around with the young goats and made mighty leaps. It thrived pleasantly, it became big and strong, and the herder now yearned daily for the return of the maiden. And one evening, the Blessed One suddenly appeared at the herder's herd, grabbed her chamois buck, and swung up on its back. She was as lightweight, delicate, lovely rider, and seemed to be 100 times more beautiful than Maiden Lorenz Tangermund on her stag. The Blessed One thanked the herder with friendly words and gave him a small box which was covered with crystals and garnets. Then she soon rode away on her chamois buck, high up over the steepest precipices and pinnacles, and soon the light-filled figure had entered the glow of the evening, riding along the highest ridges like a rose-flamed little cloud. The herder felt oddly and achingly in his heart. He would have liked to see and behold the sweet apparition and form for longer. For a time he became very sad and had no desire to see what was inside the box. Finally, and only after a few weeks had passed, he unlocked it. And it was full of ancient gold coins. And for him, this was a great treasure. And finally, he found an even sweeter treasure in a maiden from Gonda on the Ungarberg mountain. And she had blue eyes that were just as beautiful as those of the Blessed Maiden. Soon matters became serious, and the herder bought the most beautiful estate, became a happy man and father, and his wife gave birth to many beautiful children with light blue eyes and blonde hair. And this was inherited in the family until our days, and the house of the former herder remained blessed. But that huntsman, who shot the chamois in the first place, had not returned home at all after his shot. However, the Blessed Maiden can still be seen in the red of the evening, riding on her chamois buck across the rocky ridges and illuminated by a rosy glow, and people call her the Chamois Maiden. As Jurgen points out in his notes here, I like how at the end they just sort of jam in the detail that she murdered the hunter. So, yeah, I mean, they're sort of these saints of the mountains. They're pretty straightforward in their goodliness. It's strange that they are angel-like and spirit-like, but they're not those things. Like, it's funny that they're not interpreted that way, and that Hulda isn't like replaced by Mother Mary or something like that, as sometimes happens. They are still somehow distinct, but blessed. Jumpstore says, why not, Rory? We deserve a treat, to me saying, I don't know if we'll get through all of them. Because I don't know if I can. I mean, that might be like 2 hours, and at some point I'm going to have to go. Okay. Let's just carry on, because I can't complain about the time and then waste the time in between. This story is a bit more tragic. This one is called The Three Blessed Maidens near Morin in the Ötztal Valley. And it comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles collection of German folklore, translated by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support at the hopefully pinned comment below at his Patreon. Once, when a poor herder woman climbed up the alpine meadow where her husband was herding, she knelt at a wayward shrine and prayed her rosary. At that moment, a bearded vulture stole her child, a boy. But the heavens arranged it so that the vulture sat down with his prey on a rock which was not far from the herder. The herder then drove the vulture away by throwing rocks at it, and thus he became the savior of his own child, which he had not seen since the spring. But it was the three blessed maidens who lived beyond and behind a rock cliff called the Morin, who had been active but unseen in assisting with the rescue of the herder boy. The boy grew up, and in his soul he always carried a yearning for the heights of the mountains. He became a daring climber of the Alps and a mountain marksman. As such, a mysterious drive always pulled him to the plateau above the Morin, for there, as legend claimed, was supposedly a paradise for animals. Chamois supposedly dwelled there in vast numbers, and even ibexes as well, but no huntsman could get there. But the young brazen boy wanted to accomplish just this daring feat, and embarked on his journey. And the journey ended when he lost his way, and was finally unable to determine his position. In mortal danger, he slid down from the ice-covered plateau, which reached up into the clouds at a height of more than 10,000 feet. But then he emerged onto a green alpine meadow, which he'd scarcely been able to see from above. After this ordeal, his senses left him. When the huntsman regained his consciousness, he was bedded on spike lavender and edelweiss. He was lying within the crystal grotto of the three blessed maidens, who had saved him for the second time. They stood around him, radiated heavenly loveliness, and their countenance awakened the sweetest of emotions within him. He now remained the well-kept guest of the blessed maidens, and was allowed to see their splendid abode, their gardens, their animals. But he was also told that his lovely hosts were the protective goddesses of the alpine animals, and he had to promise that he would never kill such an animal, not a chamois, not an alpine hare, not a snow hen, not even a marmot. The boy was allowed to stay with the blessed maidens for 3 days, and could kiss them and worship them. But then he had to devoutly pledge 3 things on pain of his soul's peace, if he ever wanted to return or even be happy in the valley, in case he did not return. For the first, he had to pledge a silence as deep as the grave about the fact that he had ever seen the blessed maidens and stayed with them. For the second, he must neither kill nor pursue an alpine animal. And for the third, he must never allow another human eye to see the path which they showed him, and which would allow him to return to them in greater comfort. The Blessed Ones also indicated a fourth promise that should go without saying, even in the absence of oath and pledge, which was to honor the love which he had displayed towards them, and not to become familiar with any mortal woman, such as giving them a handshake or a kiss. A handshake! I don't know that they're right about this. Please discuss in the chat. Then, after a tender goodbye, the son of the Alps was guided down to a deep mountain crevice which opened up far into the valley under the cover of alpine rose shrubs. As part of the goodbyes, he was told that he would be permitted to visit during each full moon evening for 3 days, but he would only be able to enter the mountain through this deep crevice by giving a certain sign. The boy returned home as if he was a changed person. It seemed to him as if he had dreamed, and soon enough he was called the Dreamer, for he never again took a hunting rifle into his hand and joined no hunt and visited no dancing room. But each night of the full moon, he sneaked to the rocky crevice deep beneath the Morin, entered the interior of the mountain, and was happy with the blessed maidens, whose marvelous singing he often listened to in bliss. But at home his stature decayed. He became pale and feeble. In vain his parents and friends pressured him to tell him what the problem was. In response to such questions, he answered that he was not lacking in anything, for he had joys in abundance. As mother and father had noticed his secret departures during the nights of the full moon, they once secretly followed him. And just at the entrance, his mother's voice reached his ear when she called his name, and in response, the rock walls pressed together before the eyes of the young man, and the mountains crashed down, stone upon stone, with great rumbling and cracks like thunder. The young man's bliss was now lost forever. Gloomy and occupied by his own thoughts, the unfortunate one went back into his home village, paying attention to neither his mother's tears nor his father's chastisements of his character. He remained impassive towards any attempts to brighten his mood and any diversion, and wasted away listlessly until fall arrived, when the herds were driven down from the alpine meadows into the winter stables in the valley, and the beautiful lively nature of the mountain world died and was buried beneath the snow. Then a few old friends arrived at the house of the herder's son. They spoke of a hunting trip they wanted to go on that would take them up to the plateau. And then, for the first time, the eyes of the young, pale mountain marksman sparkled again. The lust for hunting, for poaching, which cannot be overcome, rose up within him. But perhaps it was another lust as well. He once more wanted to trespass into the protected realm of the Blessed Maidens, even if it was a matter of life and death. He no longer cared for life anyway, and death was liberation for him. The young man put his hunting gear into order and borrowed a hunting rifle, for his own had been smashed and shattered in a rock crevice near the Morin. Then he joined the early morning venture of the poachers. First he walked alongside them, then he hurried onwards, higher, ever higher, as if he was pulled by an irresistible force. His heart felt so light, as if the dull air of the narrow valley had crushed his chest. He climbed so quickly, as if he had eaten arsenic, which will be confusing, but the author explains, Apparently, climbers of this time took arsenic, the deadly poison, in small amounts in order to inflame their passions, which means they used it as a stimulant. Finally, he beheld a chamois scout. It whistled and vanished behind the ridge on which it had stood, and so the alpine hunter climbed that ridge, and he saw a large herd of chamois on a meadow beneath them. However, the herd was out of range for his rifle. Only one of them was quite close to him, and that one he pursued without pause until the frightened animal could go no further. And he stood still at a precipice which the marksman did not see, consumed by the thrill of the hunt as he was. He aligned his rifle. Then the animal sounded like the wailing voice of a girl. But the huntsman did not listen, and he aimed true, and he shot. And behold, a bright shine surrounded him. The chamois stood unhurt in the glow, but the 3 blessed maidens now floated before him and approached him. And when he beheld them in this manner, looking at them without love and without smiles for the first time, the young man was overcome by a deep dread. He stumbled backwards, and after one further step, tumbled back into 1,000-foot deep abyss. And from his footsteps, crumbling rocks broke loose, and an avalanche rumbled after him and buried him beneath detritus and rubble. So that's a less cheerful one. Oh, they're talking about the shield art for Arrow Ace vegetarians, because I have several in my chat. Okay. Jess says, well, he blew it. Zombie Wolf says, the truth of every fairy tale, men cannot keep a promise to a woman to save their lives. I gotta be honest, I'm a little bit on his side here. He was just a boy, a pretty young boy. They're ancient spirits, and they kind of manipulated him. Like he was going to die, and then they just sort of took him into a thing, and they're like, now that you're here, here's a bunch of pledges you have to take or you're going to die. Also, it seems weird to be like, you can see us for 3 days a month, but the cost of that is you can't have any love in your life. Like, that's wild. I don't know. I don't think they're completely good here. I don't think his reaction was good, but I find it hard to view them blameless. Okay. Yeah, I will just introduce this one all at once. There's a little bit of a note here for you guys. Our next story is called Hatte, and it has a content warning. It themes itself around physical abuse and kidnapping. It doesn't do so in a celebratory manner, nor is it particularly gruesome and graphic. But if that is a theme you cannot handle, then if you're not watching live, click on to the next tale. And if you are watching live, I'll give you a wave when it's done. Probably take about 10 minutes, 6 to 10 minutes. All right. Hatte. To the east of the Ungarberg mountains above Ötztal, and high above the vault of the grotto which is called Ötztal, there is a spot called Hulda, or charcoal hut, surrounded near tall mountain walls and near a large eerie rock crevice. A long time ago, a wild man lived there in solitude with his fanga. Pausing for a moment, wild man has a lot of different contexts, but here, wild man means giant. And Fanga is his wife, a hairy giant as well. Jordan, as the Wild One was called, which is just such a plain name for it. I don't know. It just surprised me. Had built a rough log house there. And apart from stealing and eating children and animals, he made it his business to pursue the Blessed Ones, the 3 maidens that we're talking about, to catch them, kill them, or imprison them in subterranean caves. In this manner, the giant Jordan once brought a blessed maiden home, likely one from the grotto behind Urga or Ega Kela. She was more dead than alive, and he threw it to his Fanga. And he was about to end her life, but the Fanga said, "Let the little thing live. It could be a service to me." "Well," screamed the giant, "where would you like to have her?" "I'd like to have her in the hut for labor," answered the giant woman, and the giant mocked, "Take your Hatte for all I care. Put that white cat next to the black one." For the giant couple also kept a large black cat for company. The poor blessed maiden now had to do most of the chores for the giant couple and was not called anything other than Hitte, had to wear maid's clothes, and was required to do the chores of a maid, despite being a blessed maiden. But she did the latter with great skill and great diligence, and so that the Fang was as well disposed and mild towards the servant as was possible for someone of her nature. The Blessed One was also good towards the cat, fed it punctually, let it sleep under her bed, and caused it to become completely comfortable around her. The Blessed One, who now had completely taken on the nature of a worldly maid, nevertheless yearned to be gone from the rough company of the giants. Thus one day she used the opportunity when the giant Jordan was away and the Fang was asleep, and climbed down into the valley in order to try her luck with the humans. But strangely, as if it had guessed the plan of her friend, the cat followed her with every step. In this manner it occurred that an attractive young woman stepped into the home of the Zias farmer Krapf, who lived close to the Stra in the Gurgel Valley, and offered her services. The Zias farmer and his wife were good and devout people, though they were not very bright and not very adjustable. Their finances had fallen behind, and they could only offer poor wages, and thus they did not retain enough laborers. The Blessed Maiden, that's too good. Thus they hired the attractive young woman for a low wage, and did not bother to ask her much about her origin. Back in those days, there also weren't any service books or other certificates yet. And if you're wondering what that is, a so-called Dienstbuch was a pre-printed booklet that served to identify farm laborers and had rows for filling in details of their past employment. I won't say more than that. The Blessed Maiden fulfilled her service with joy and love. Thanks to her nature as a spirit, every chore was just a game, and everything was done as if by itself. And with the start of her employment, blessings entered the Krapf's Ziaus farm, and it was a joy to observe how Hitte, the Blessed One, had kept that name, worked and ran the household. The most skilled farmer woman could not have done this better, and Hitte was a true master when it came to flax and its treatments. She worked quietly, spoke little, and said even fewer useless things. Well, I couldn't be one then. And was always shy, modest, and humble, and the farmers were only too glad to leave her be as she quietly did her labors. Her darling was and remained the cat, which was also very useful for the house, which kept the attic and stable free of rats and mice. I think my cat probably get overtook on by a rat. Hitte was only afraid of one thing, which was the giant who had raged terribly about her escape and who beat his fanga horribly. But he could not do anything to her in the valley, as there was a procession circling the boundaries of the community every year when these were blessed, and there were also crosses and column shrines standing everywhere, which were abhorrent to the heathen giant folk. And one evening, Lenz visited, whose full name was Lorenz Meyerhofer, who was the friend of the Seehaus farmer. He had sold his ox at Imst and had been traveling from there, carrying the oxen's yoke by himself. He entered the Seehaus farm, ate dinner with the farmer, and conversed with the farmer and his wife over a glass of Tyrolean country wine, which the young woman had to pour for him. He told them, "Sometimes you experience strange things. When I walked from the Dillinger farm towards the Seehaus, someone from up high shouted in a loud voice, 'Ox yoke bear! Ox yoke bear! Tell Hitte that she should go home. Jordan is dead.'" And the Seehaus farmer and his wife looked at each other, and then both looked at Hitte, but the latter put her spoon down and said, "If Jordan is dead, then I am free. Take good care of the hairy houseworm. You have my gratitude and have fortune for your animals. If you had asked me more, I would have told you more." And then the Blessed One stood up, walked out the door, and was never seen again. The farmer and his wife and their good friends wondered what all this meant. The hairy houseworm referred to the cat, which, by the way, holy crap, how have we not called cats hairy houseworms? I've never seen that before. What an amazing euphemism. The farmers at Strad still bemoan, "It's too bad the Zeus farmer hadn't asked the Blessed One more, for if he'd asked her more, we would know more." That's a story that is a little more typical in its form. Witchery says, who has a farm, as I understand it. Cats are for mice, terriers are for rats. That makes sense. Yeah, my cat's a little smaller than average and thin and not very good at detecting things and kind of slow and a bit dumb. And doesn't have a lot of like heft behind it, and he gets scared easily, and everything that moves he's scared of. He's an anxious... He just... If he wasn't a pet, things would not be going well for him. Jump Store says hairy houseworm could be something worse. I don't think so. We're gonna reclaim hairy houseworm. All right, where are we at for time? Ooh. I think we can get through one more. I don't think I'll be able to get through another after that, but we'll see. This one is definitely the most grim, I guess is the word I would go for. It also carries a content warning that you should probably take a little more seriously. Like the last one was more just themes and subjects. This one's a bit brutal, which for some people is going to perk them up, and for others it might be worth it. But if you are, by the way, skipping the last one, this is me waving. Come back in. Okay. Our next story is called The Maidens of Zyga Mountain. And serious content warning here. This involves the stalking and murdering of women. So if that is something you are not interested in, or it's too grim for you, then if I do read another story, skip to that one or just end it here, because this is a bit more gruesome. It also comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, who you should support at their Patreon down in the pinned comment below. There is a mid-sized mountain near Graun in the upper Finchgau Valley, which is called Zyga. The Zyga maidens are supposedly dwelled in there in olden times. They lived in wide splendid chambers beneath the blocks of stones of the mountains, and were well disposed and friendly towards humans. They were generally merry, and their good mood left them only occasionally, particularly during bad weather. Frequently they sat clad in white on the large stone beneath the old larch tree and sang all sorts of songs. One evening, when they once again sang in this manner, a herder passed by. He was so enchanted by the beautiful singing that he stood still and sat down on a stone and listened to the Salge maidens until deep into the night, before they finally vanished altogether with the descending moon, and only then did he regain his senses, thought of his young wife and his herd, and returned home. But ever since he had seen the Salge maidens, he became monosyllabic and melancholic, for the Salge maidens were constantly in his mind. Without ever saying a word to his wife, he frequently went to the Salge in order to listen to the singing. Finally, the beautiful maidens became more comfortable with him. They led him into their splendid chambers and showed him entire herds of chamois which they kept as their pets. And since then, the farmer often went to the Salge during the home garden, and frequently stayed away from home for long periods of time. And just to read this note, because it was confusing to me, the home garden is the local name for the spinning chamber of other regions, a regular event where several households would gather in a single chamber of a farmhouse in order to entertain themselves with singing, gossip, telling stories while doing some chores such as spinning, which we have talked about before. His wife noticed this, and all sorts of jealous thoughts awoke in her. She made the most acrimonious accusations about his frequent absences and decided to investigate the cause of his nightly wanderings. And when he wanted to go away again one evening in order to, as he claimed, search for a lost goat, his wife pretended to be very affectionate with him, embraced him, and pleaded with him intensely that he should come home again soon. But while she was doing this, she attached a piece of twine on one of his buttons of his jacket without him noticing it, and she kept the ball of twine it was attached to with her. And when the farmer had walked some distance and a significant amount of twine had been uncoiled from the ball, she also left the house and followed the guiding thread which led her to the Salge. There she met her husband in the middle of the Salge maidens, who were singing songs for him, and as she saw this, she started to weep and to wail and curse the day of their wedding, as well as the Salge maidens. And then the Salge maidens vanished between the stones and have not been seen since. The farmer also did not live for much longer. Another legend about the disappearance of the Salge maidens, that when the shooting became popular, they wept and howled and fled over the mountains and ridges and have not returned since. This is the content warning part. Takes us through to the end of the tale. So last chance. It is known that the wild man, which we've already discussed in the last story, is the enemy and the pursuer of the Salge maidens. Once, when he hunted them, the maidens screamed and wept and fled through the spruce forest which is located north of the Salge. There they hid, but this was to no avail, for soon he found their trail, caught up to them, and tore them apart on Planmore Mountain, as if they were cobwebs. Even today, the children show the stone in the spruce forest where the Salge maidens had rested during their flight and wept in despair. Once a drunk man heard the Salge maidens weep pitifully in the forest, and he realized well that the wild man was pursuing them, and called out to them, "Hunt heartily and beg heartily, and if you've collected heartily, leave a quarter for me." And indeed, the next morning they asked for a quarter piece of a Salge maiden that the wild man had hewn apart hung at the door of the drunk man. However, well-meaning people will create places of refuge for the maidens which protect them from stalking of the wild man. For when tree trunks are felled in the forest, they hew 3 crosses into the stumps that remain behind. If a Salge maiden reaches such a wooden stump, she is safe from further pursuit of the wild man. The Salge maidens never harmed anyone, but showed their assistance to other people in all sorts of ways, and also favored children. They often helped the latter with collecting wood. Such wood burned exceptionally well and for a long time. Frequently during the winter time, 2 Salge maidens appeared at a farmhouse at 8:30 and spun flax there until 11 o'clock. But when the locals wanted to pay them for their diligence, they left the house under tears and did not come back. Such a maiden once served with another farmer for 2 years, and faithfully and diligently did everything that she was ordered to do. All of them had in common that they did not utter a word while doing their chores. But even where they approached humans as servants, they did not have any peace from the wild man. In this manner he once came to the above-mentioned maiden after 2 years had passed and spoke to her. "Statsamatsa, you should go home. For Mon Yokdagger has said that your mother has died." And upon hearing these words, she hurried away, and the wild man quickly followed her. And soon a whimpering and howling was audible, and the maiden did not appear again. Truly chilling end to that story. Jumpster, how's the wife, the bad guy here? No kidding, right? Just like explain yourself. So often the expectation of communication with a partner is just viewed villainously. Jumpstore says gross, bro. I'm assuming with the quarter thing. Yeah, that's pretty brutal. Jumpstore also says being offered to be paid is an insult to them. I bet they frequently post about their dedication to the work grind on LinkedIn. I believe the implication here is that they are part of that sort of Christian sense of charity where you do it for the good of itself and not for reward. And therefore, you know, it's sort of lowly to see them needing rewards. Well, that story took a bit quicker than I thought. All right. You guys have twisted my arm. This is one of the longer tales, but we'll read it. Let me get a drink of water, and then we will get to our long tales. Yeah, Jumpster, I don't know. I don't know what their metaphysical status is supposed to be. I think really what interests me personally about them as a subject is that strange quality. Almost always these fey and weird events and stuff exist in combination with Christianity, but they're sort of always kind of, you know, the chaos of the wilds and nature and not holy in any way. But these ones are explicitly like holy and acting in the name of God and whatever else, and yet they're not saints and they're not angels. So what are they? Like, they're very, very unique in the pantheon of the pantheon of folklore. Okay. Let's read one more story, why don't we? This story is called The Three Blessed Ones on Ungarberg Mountain. And it also comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, translated by Jürgen Hubert, who you should support at his Patreon, linked down below. Between the market town of Imst and the toll station of Nazarite, the Biggerbach stream flows through the expanse of the Gurgle Valley, which should not be confused with the Gurgle Valley that starts close to the foot of Ötztal Glacier. A hamlet named Straw in the local idiom, is found along the path about an hour above Straw. There is a cellar-shaped vault within Ungarberg or Ungarskopf mountain. This was once the entrance to the abode of three blessed maidens who lived beneath the mountain, and they were called the holy ones by the locals. These sometimes appeared outside the domed entrance to their grotto in order to bleach linen, or they would hang up snow-white gowns on rays of sunlight which shone through the dense leaves of the forest or the crevices of the rocks. Occasionally the holy ones allegedly also came down to Straw and helped the girls with spinning flax, but the humans shied away from them, and those who saw the white gowns float in the air were overcome with fear and fled. In the vault, which was usually called Egaskala, some say Ergaskala, and scholars of classic antiquity would probably drag the nymph Agaria into this by her beautiful hair, there was an opening similar to the one at the Thuringian Herzinberg mountain. Maybe. That's how you pronounce that. It was of a size that a boy might be able to squeeze into it. But the difference to the hole in Herzinberg is that the one at the Ungarberg is not always seen as open. Even if someone has seen it open once before, they will not find it again, or else they will discover that it has been closed by rocks. Once the herder of straw went up there in order to cut off birch branches and fashion brooms with them. The nice green space in front of the vault was well suited for his labor. He removed the leaves of the cut branches and tied his brooms. The next day, when he went back up to this location in order to continue this work, he no longer found a single birch leaf on the ground, for it had all been swept away. He sat down on a block of stone and tended to his task. Then sweet, delightful singing from beautiful voices of 3 girls arose deep in the interior of the mountain. This charmed the heart of the poor young herder. He listened for a long time with bated breath until the singing ended, and then he climbed back down to straw as if intoxicated. Soon the broom maker was back at the spot which he'd come to hold dear. The herd was grazing and guarded by faithful dog. The leaves were once more cleanly swept away, and when the herder looked up, he saw 3 white girls' dresses hanging in the air, fluttering in the wind. He did not see any rope on which the dresses were hanging, and dread overcame him, and he hurried away. If he'd only taken one of the dresses, one of the blessed ones would have been bound to his side in his service. Nevertheless, even though the hung-up dresses had startled him, an irresistible yearning pulled him back to the height of the Ungarberg after several days, and behold, unhoped for and unexpectedly, a blessed maiden showed herself to his gaze in the full loveliness of her countenance, but she did not approach him. Instead, it seemed that the Blessed One wanted him to follow her. She looked at him and smiled, and then went away into the mountain, and thus disappeared from his sight. He did not dare enter the mountain as well. He only listened to the blissfulness of the singing that echoed from the depths, and then consumed himself in silent yearning. A farmer lived in Straw, who was named Anton Tangle, and it has been less than 10 years since he died. Been a lot more than 10 years, though, at this point. He once also came up to the vicinity of the vault in order to dig up sticks, and when he dug out and lifted a stick with particularly deep roots, a hole that went deep into the ground suddenly showed itself to him. Tangle looked inside and through the opening, and down the slope he saw a gently illuminated green lawn and a milk-white mountain stream with frothing waves flowing across it. This astonished the man greatly. He was astonished even more when he saw the 3 snow-like maidens sitting on the green expanse deep below him. Appearing small like puppets, they sat next to each other. They held each other in their arms in a sisterly manner, and sang a lovely song whose melody he heard clearly, but whose words he could not understand. Tangle listened until night arrived and he could no longer distinguish anything down there. Then he went down to Straw and told the others of his strange experience, but nobody wanted to believe him. And the next day several friends accompanied Tangle back up to Ungarberg. Tangle proceeded again, searched for the right spot. However, he sought it in vain, and all of his searches were unsuccessful. Thus he had to suffer being called a doughhead, a fool, a liar, and a no-good dreamer by the others. "If I only kept my mouth shut," was something Tangle often said later on, "and if I crawled into that mountain instead of gossiping about it to others, I could have become a very fortunate indeed. Carried beautiful things outside, but humans can be very foolish creatures at times." And if you're wondering, what is the point of that story, or the stories, since it is effectively two stories about the same location, folklore doesn't always have a point, other than here's a funny thing that happened. Jumpstore says it's always three women. Men back in the day must have gotten folklore PTSD every time they noticed three women going about their day. Zombie Wolf says, "Oh no, truly his very ancestors themselves felt those sick burns." I'm definitely going to be calling some friends doughheads from now on. That's a new one to me. Maybe it's like a German thing, but I've never heard that one in English. Yeah, Zombie Wolf, I see your comment earlier making fun of the giant being called Jordan. "Behold the ultimate intimidating creature of immense strength and physical power." Wow, what's their name? Steve. There we go. There is one like little short passage. It's like a bonus. It takes like 10 seconds to read. I'm not going to introduce it at the end, and that covers the section about Blessed Maidens. This one's called Blessed Maids, and all it says is, "The Blessed Maids served with several farmers at Lutzfun. Once a blessed one fell in love with a young farmer and married him. During the wedding, when they went behind the high altar during the Eucharist rite, she vanished. All searching was in vain, and when people went home from church, they heard her wail on the other side of the valley." Nobody really knows what that means, but it is interesting because it seems to imply that there was something about the holiness of the Eucharist that caused her to run away, which seems to imply that she's fae. But then she acts in blessed ways and is holy and never does anyone any wrong. And I don't know what they are. They're very strange phenomenons as far as folklore goes. It is, a collection of things we see. As Jumpstore says, it's usually three women. And usually they don't mean well. And they do the same kind of things about where, they charm men, whether intentionally or unintentionally is unclear, in such a way that they sort of start to waste away and can't live a normal life anymore. Like, they do all these fae things, and yet they are held as if they were saints. You make of that what you will. But there we go. It is good to be back. I hope to be back also on Thursday. I don't know 100% if I will, but I'm going to ask a question now that chat can discuss as I disappear. And that is, I have two possible games I could play on Thursday should we have our stream. I'm just going to give you a brief description of both. You tell me which one I should play first. I will eventually play them both. The first one, you play a guy, I believe, named Steve. Which is funny because of Zombie Wolf's comment. You play a guy named Steve who gets summoned to other dimensions where a person is trying to summon a devil to do something for them. But they screw it up, and somehow Steve keeps ending up getting sucked over there. So it's a solo RPG. So you have to complete whatever treacherous task they were going to charge a devil with before you can go home. The next one is a game where you are trying to resurrect the prince who is your lover before the king's men can break in and stop you from your terrible necromancy. And structurally as a game, which I admit I haven't looked enough at to see if I can make it work on stream, so maybe this will decide itself. It's kind of blackjack, which is really weird. It's like a multi-hand blackjack you play yourself. Those are two ones that I'm looking at. So necromancer, blackjack, or Steve being summoned when they were trying to get a devil. Whichever one you think is most interesting. So as per usual, when we end the stream, Zombie Wolf has a little bit of random trivia. And Zombie Wolf's random trivia tonight is that the northern lights can actually be seen from space, but they are much less clear. This is because they can occur up to 100 kilometers from Earth. And yeah, that is true, because it is, well, quite the phenomenon. Thank you, Tammy, for coming here. It also says sweet dreams. Thank you, Witchery, for your fun fact. And, or sorry, not fun fact, sorry. Witchery, thank you for your attendance and joining in on the stream. You'll be missing Friday because of a doctor's appointment. Oh, well, then the whole stream's off. Well, I don't know. I'm kidding. Thank you to Gennaro for dropping by, GS for keeping me company here, and of course, Uncle Kitty, if you're out there, I hope things are going well for you, and we hope to see you back here again. I hope I haven't missed anybody, but if I have, it's nothing personal. I know Clara jumped in earlier. Thank you for watching if you've made it this far. Yeah, here's to clearer skies and better tides. I'll keep the fire burning for you. You have a good sleep.